All right, so ChatGPT 5.6 Sol and Claude Fable 5 are both out, and people are losing their minds over which one actually wins. I ran them across 4 real tests, and the score ended up razor thin, 7-6 with 3 ties. Both models just dropped. So this is the moment to actually figure out which one fits your workflow. I'm comparing them across 4 real tests: long context reasoning, agentic coding, API pricing, and creative writing. Verified sources only, no vendor spin. And honestly, the model that wins on price isn't the one that wins on capability, and the gap between them is way smaller than the price difference suggests. Which one you pick could cost you thousands if you get it wrong. So who is this actually for? If you're a developer running agentic coding tasks at volume, or a writer who needs consistently polished drafts, the wrong pick here isn't just annoying. One community reported build cost $62 on Fable 5 versus $7 on Sol for the exact same app, and that kind of gap adds up fast when you're literally hammering these models every day. Test 1, long context reasoning and instruction following. Here's what actually goes wrong when a model fails at this. You feed it a 200-page contract, ask it to pull a specific clause, and it confidently hands you the wrong one buried on page 40. You don't catch it, you ship it, and now you've got a real problem. Both models have over 1 million token context windows. So the question is what they actually do with all that space. Okay, so what I looked at was Terminal Bench 2.1. The only shared benchmark I could find for both models. Sol scored 88.8%, Fable 5 scored 88.0%. That's a 0.8 point gap, which is basically nothing. What surprised me is that Fable 5 has a press-documented edge at pulling information buried deep in the context window, and Sol has no equivalent published figure. Bear in mind, these scores come from a single blog review, not an independent lab. Now, I want to be honest about this before we call it. The 0.8 point gap is well within noise for a single benchmark run. Sol's context window is 50,000 tokens larger, but no real-world task has surfaced that difference as meaningful. And Fable 5's deep context retrieval edge is vendor documented, not independently verified. So this is genuinely close, and it kind of depends on whether you're doing deep document analysis or not. Honestly, I was expecting one of these to pull ahead clearly, and what actually happened is they're basically identical on the only shared data point we have. This one's a tie. The score sits at 0-0 with 1 tied so far, and if you're doing deep document retrieval, Fable 5 probably has a real edge, but the benchmark alone doesn't prove it. Test 2, coding and agentic task completion. The failure mode that actually costs you money here is pretty specific. You spin up an agent to build something, it runs for 20 minutes, burns through tokens, and then you realize the output is broken, and you have to run it again. If the model isn't token efficient, that loop gets expensive fast, and if it can't handle a massive code base, you're just stuck. So the data here is a split, which is pretty interesting. Sol is way more token efficient. Sam Altman claimed 54% more efficient than the prior generation, and one community reported build came in at $7 for Sol versus $62 for Fable 5 on the same app. But Fable 5 handled a 50 million line Stripe codebase migration and finished the frontier physics task in 36 hours versus 4 days on GPT-5. These are genuinely different strengths. I was expecting one of these to just dominate coding, and what came out instead is a genuine split by use case. Sol wins on cost per task, Fable 5 wins on raw ceiling for complex work. So this is another tie, which puts us at 0-0 with 2 tests tied now, and there's no overall coding winner here. Only a use case question. Test 3, API pricing and subscription value. This one stings in a very specific way. You sign up for a plan, you start building, and then your bill arrives way higher than you expected because you didn't realize Fable 5's pro subscription only gives you a one-time $100 credit, and then you're paying API rates. That's a nasty surprise when you're mid-project. What I found here is pretty clear. Sol comes in at $5 per million input tokens and $30 per million output tokens, while Fable 5 is $10 input and $50 output. So Sol is literally twice as cheap on input and 40% cheaper on output at standard rates. In a community-reported cafe app, build backs that up. $7 on Sol, $62 on Fable 5. Bear in mind that $62 figure is a single data point, so take it as directional, not definitive. Now, the gap isn't as clean as it looks. Sol charges a surcharge above 272,000 input tokens, jumping to $10 input and $45 output per million at that level, which narrows its cost advantage pretty fast for heavy long context workloads. And we don't have verified consumer subscription pricing for Sol, so the subscription comparison is honestly incomplete. If you're running massive context windows constantly, Fable 5 might actually be cheaper in some scenarios. Okay, so I was expecting pricing to be close given how similar these models are on benchmarks, and Sol just runs away with it at standard rates. Sol takes this test that puts the score at 1 for Sol, 0 for Fable 5, with 2 ties still on the board, and at volume, that 2 times input cost difference is real money. Test 4, creative writing quality and stylistic range. Here's what goes wrong when a model is bad at this. You ask it to write a scene in a specific tone, it gives you something generic and flat, and you spend more time editing than you would have just writing it yourself. Or you need a dozen variations across different moods, and it just keeps giving you the same voice with slightly different words. So I looked at the structured comparison from Noren AI, who ran 64 outputs across multiple genres, and Fable 5 won every single genre tested. That's not a close call. What surprised me is that Sol does have native image generation, which is a real advantage if you need text and visuals together in one workflow. But on pure prose quality, the press review from Geeky Gadgets, also called Fable 5, more intuitive to use. Bear in mind, this is one study, one methodology. I honestly thought Sol might hold its own here, given how capable it is across other dimensions, but Fable 5 just swept the creative writing test. Fable 5 takes it. That ties the overall score at 1-1 with two tests still tied. And the only thing Sol has going for it in creative work is that native image gen, which is genuinely useful but doesn't close the prose quality gap. So here's where Sol clearly wins. API cost, $5 input versus $10, $30 output versus $50. That's real money and volume, and real-world agentic coding tasks run roughly 1/9 the cost in community-reported builds. Sol's visual self-correction loop, where it opens what it just built, spots a broken layout, and fixes it, is a concrete front-end advantage, and it's the only one of these two with native image generation built in. And here's where Fable 5 clearly wins: creative writing. It took every genre in a 64-output structured test, and the UX for writers is just more intuitive than Sol's. On frontier scale coding, it handled a 50 million line Stripe codebase migration and finished a physics research task in 36 hours. And it has the press documented edge at pulling information buried deep in a long context window, which Sol can't match with a published number. Honestly, I was expecting a clear winner, and what I got was two models that are genuinely good at different things. So here's the decision rule. If you're running agentic coding tasks at volume and cost per task matters, Sol is your pick. If you're doing frontier scale engineering, long document analysis, or serious creative writing, Fable 5 earns its higher price. And if you're a serious user, the best setup might actually be Fable 5 orchestrating a fleet of Sol agents.